But then something else I would definitely recommend, and it worked quite well for me, was having a mistakes book. It sounds really cynical, but every time I would get a mark back or paper back, you get those huge chunks of feedback from your teachers, or even if I was just handing in practice papers or I got questions wrong, I would have this giant Google document on my laptop. And I would split it up, into my different subjects and write down the things that I got wrong and the things that I needed to go back and work on. So like for English, it was like, oh, make your thesis statement clearer. In my feedback, I'd be like, okay, I'm going to put that down there. So when I was doing new questions or getting prepared to kind of like do a practice paper, I would go back and look at my mistakes book and think, okay, these are the things that I need to fix. It's the best method for me, I think, because it ensures you never make the same mistake twice. And it helped me kind of conceptualize all the things that I just needed to work on, all my weak areas. So by the time that I got to trials, I had kind of worked on fixing a lot of the things that I used to do wrong at the start of the year. I kind of was able to really focus on developing all my study technique, and all my practice was going towards honing in on my weak areas. It sounds like a really depressing thing to have a giant document of all the things you've done wrong in your HSC, but it was really good to just look back and actually think, okay, this is what I need to fix in order to get good marks. And it makes it so easy because you can just see exactly what you need to do. Those would probably be my two biggest things: consistency and the mistakes book.
Look, I think the mistakes book's a great idea. I think some people do that in different forms. So another thing that came to mind, depends on the subject to some extent. But if you were doing a subject like PDHP or society and culture or economics, you would get the feedback, as you say, figure out all the different subtopics where you lost marks, and then you'd have a printout version of your syllabus or an online version and highlight in red. A lot of people do this, highlight in red those dot points, and then they're the things that you then just focus on until you have 100% kind of clarity on that particular area. So there are different ways of attacking it, but I think the mistakes book's a great idea. And I think, and you said that you actually did that via a Google Doc, which makes it pretty easy, right? Just paste it all in there. You can categorize it by subject, and then it allows you to consciously focus on your weak areas or weaker areas and make them your strengths, right? And as you say, then you won't make the same mistakes twice, which would be crazy. But a lot of students don't actually take the time to identify those and actually isolate them out and then focus disproportionately on those weaker areas. Because as I say, everyone likes to focus on the things they're good at, right? It's like comfort food. And you will happily go and study the thing that you know you can get 100% on. But the thing that seems to be a kind of escaping your understanding and it requires a lot more time and effort, that's the thing you're going to have the most resistance towards. So if you can go through a process that you're talking about, having the mistakes book or document, putting those things on there, it's going to encourage you to just kind of sit down with that and make those the first things you do rather than the last thing, which would be the temptation for most students.
Yeah, exactly. And it's all about, like you said, working on the areas that you're weak in, because you can go into any exam and you can have you can feel really confident with a lot of the content, but ultimately where you're going to lose marks is on the things that you don't know. So it's about making sure that you go into every test just feeling like you just know as much as you possibly can. But yeah, it was really helpful for me because I feel like, particularly with English, I would always have things that I needed to work on. And every time before I would write a response, I'd sit down and look at the document. I'd be like, okay, so in this response, I really need to focus on my thesis. That's what I need to focus on. But yeah, it's definitely a very helpful technique for sure.
Yeah, and it plays into something else. I was speaking to a school recently about this. So maybe you're familiar with the term, but the kind of Pareto principle, it's also known as the 80-20 rule. And the idea is that if you were to look at your exam or look at a topic and look at the syllabus, if you can figure out what your weakest 20% is in terms of those topics, which would probably be the things going into your mistake book or mistake document, right? They're probably going to account for at least 80% of the lost marks in your exam, right? So if you can think about it like that, I think that's quite useful to kind of figure out what is your bottom 20%. And then, because if that's accounting for 80% of the lost marks, you should be spending 80% of your study time on those particular topics. Whereas often it's at least the opposite, if not more. People will go, oh, I'm not even going to look at those areas because I'm uncomfortable with them. So the better students will definitely have a system like you've just described to do that, identify the weaker areas, and then spend a disproportionate amount of your study time on those areas.
It's the way to go about it. It can be hard sitting down and forcing yourself to actually do the hard task of relearning and getting things wrong, but ultimately it works in the long run.